We've talked a lot about ionic. Ionic is definitely a little bit tricky on the writing chemical formulas of. However, covalent is going to be harder later on down the road when we have to draw structures of it. So we kind of pair off. So right now, ionic is a little bit harder in this chapter. Covalent's a little bit easy, but it's a totally different system. And part of it is really based off the fact that covalent compounds don't have any ions in there. There is nothing to balance out. There are no ions. They share electrons. So they are, again, we call them molecules, and so they don't associate with each other in the same way. They don't cluster all together in one massive cluster with the whole number ratio. Instead, they actually form specific structures. They share electrons, so there's no ions in there. And that means I can't make a guess at the subscripts. I basically have to be told the subscripts, which means you have to include the subscripts in the name. And when I name it, when I write formulas, I have to make sure I'm looking for those subscripts and incorporating them. So it's a little bit different because the subscript is actually included in the name. I don't need to do that with ionic compounds because I know the ion charges. I can figure it out. Can't figure it out for covalent. We do need to use this Greek prefix list and memorize it. This is not supplied for you. You do need to memorize this. A lot of them will look familiar from math class because they kind of sound like your pentagons, a pentagon and a hexagon and an octagon and a nonagon, similar prefixes for how many, and these will be the prefixes I use to indicate the subscript in the name. So mono, di, tri, tetra, penta, hexa, hepta, octa, nona, deca. Now, when I'm naming them, I'm basically going to do the same thing. I'm breaking it up into the first element and the second element. Both will be nonmetals, and the rule of thumb when we put them in, it's a complex rule, but the one that is lower in electronegativity gets listed first. Don't worry about it. If you were to write the right thing, but they were in the wrong order, but we are going to name it in the order that it's supplied. So if you're given a name, you're going to put the elements in the order that they are in the name. So I first have and each part of the name it's really 4 pieces to the whole name. I have 2 words. The first word has an element in it and it has a prefix. Second word has an element in it and a prefix. So CO2, my 2 elements are carbon and oxygen. There is no subscript for carbon. I could use mono, but we generally don't, especially for the first element. Sometimes in the second element we'll use mono, but mono is often not used because it's kind of implied. So it might be there, it might not. Not a real good feeling for when to use it, when not to. I'm not going to be picky on using mono or not using mono. So we begin with the first element. So the prefix wouldn't be there because there is the implied coefficient or subscript is 1. And then I put carbon. Now I focus on the second one. The subscript comes first. So the subscript is 2. The prefix for 2 is di. And then I'm going to list the element name, oxygen, but I change the ending to IDE, just like I did with the ionic compounds. The second element has the end changed to IDE. So carbon dioxide, iodine heptachloride, diphosphorus pentoxide. So we get that pattern. So there's 4 pieces, a prefix and the first element, a prefix and the second element. And there's no crisscross. There's no math, there's no algebra being on, there's no balancing of charges here. So the prefix of the element is the subscript for that element. Again, the general rules. I want to check that it's covalent. So I'm looking for, are they all non-elements, non-metal elements in there? So I'm looking, when I see it start, it's not a metal, it's beginning with a non-metal element name would be a good, or it's beginning with a Greek prefix would be a good indicator that it is a covalent formula. And then I want to write the symbol of the first element. I kind of have to ignore the prefix temporarily and write the first element so then I have a place to put the subscript on. And then I want to write the second element, again, kind of ignoring its prefix. And then I go back and look at the prefixes and put them in as subscripts for the various things. Again, no crisscrossing. So sulfur trioxide, I see sulfur is a non-metal, so this is a covalent compound. I put sulfur for the first element. I put oxygen for the second element. And now I go back and look at the prefixes. There is no prefix for sulfur, so no subscript. A prefix of tri means a subscript of 3. So there's a variety of these. These are pretty quick and easy. What is the formula for bromine pentafluoride? And name SF6. We can go back and forth. So this is a fairly easy part of this chapter.